So I think the biggest surprise is how quickly and entirely our world has changed in such a very short amount of time. That we really just, it was like a switch that flipped, and just our whole worlds were upended and changed almost overnight. And I think that the other thing that surprised me is how well most people are adapting to such sudden and tremendous change, and that it's hard for everyone and it's different for everyone, and there are tremendous hardships that people are having to deal with, but that from my vantage point, I guess I'm surprised at how well people are doing given the circumstances.
I would agree with that. And I also think that I'm surprised but very heartened by how much kindness I'm seeing in the world, that people are, it would be so easy, I think, especially among people like us who tend to do our work alone in rooms, to kind of check out and just do that. But the opposite is happening. People are checking in, and I'm not sure if you guys are aware down there, but it's National Poetry Month. And it is true that whenever there's a huge catastrophe, suddenly there's poetry everywhere. This happened during the economic downturn. It happened after September 11th. But the fact that it's happening now during Poetry Month means that there's a heightened interest not only in poems, but also in the fact that poems seem to be bringing us something that is essential to nurture the human spirit. And for many of us, that's always true. But for most people, I think they're busy and they forget. And then something catastrophic happens, and they're casting around trying to figure out what vocabulary will answer that moment. And the poetic vocabulary right now is side by side with the scientific vocabulary. And the poetic vocabulary is pretty stable. The scientific vocabulary is the one that seems to be changing and altering moment by moment.
One of the things that I think we've lost is our the intimacy we have in our social interactions, and we lost that again almost overnight. I think it was Dr. Fauci who said that we may not shake hands in the future as part of our greetings with each other, and at least not for a very long time. And in more intimate gatherings and social events, we might not be hugging people like we used to and on a regular basis. And I think that there's just this this distance that we've had to put in between us. I think that that's going to continue for a while. It's certainly there now. It's there on purpose, but I also feel that it's something that people will still be anxious about in the future, certainly until we have an effective vaccine and useful treatments. And so I think that we've definitely lost that social intimacy, and it might be around for a while.
Yesterday I did a Zoom dissertation defense with one of my students, and those tend to be celebratory affairs. It's the committee, the student reads from the poems from the manuscript, and the committee asks those questions that are the ones they always wanted to know, about this student and the student's work. And the room is full of colleagues. These are sort of by academic law, they're open to the public. So the student's family can come, students' friends can come, colleagues from different departments. And just figuring out how to manage the formal part of the event so that I could take cues from the committee members, and we could still have a room full of people who had to have their cameras off, because if there were 40 people on the screen, I couldn't necessarily judge that a committee member had just raised an eyebrow at me, indicating that he wanted to be, called on to ask a question. And at the end, my student, who's just this brilliant, brilliant poet, expressed her gratitude, but also her grief that this once in a lifetime milestone was passing for her without having the warm-blooded mammalian company of the people who had nurtured her through this whole process for the last 5 years. And instead of taking her out for a drink, we're going to have a Zoom cocktail. I'm not even going to buy her drink. She's going to have to provide it herself. So this is, it's a one-time loss in a way for me, or, you know, this series of Zoom dissertation defense and oral exams, et cetera. Each one is a one-time loss because I have a whole, you know, decades of these behind me and more of them in front of me. But for that student, it's a permanent loss. It's something that the student worked for many years that will never, ever happen in the way they imagined.
I think some of the things that might be positive that we'll see is certainly we're all becoming more expert at video conferencing. And so we all now know Zoom and FaceTime and Skype and Google Hangouts, et cetera.
Even the poets.
Yes, and because of the great need that we're all depending on these video conferencing systems, all of them are getting better quite quickly, faster than they would have before. And that people are having to use them has opened up opportunities and thinking about things in new ways. So we've heard from colleagues in other fields, for example, psychologists and sociologists and clinical therapists who can now no longer have their daily meetings face-to-face with their patients, but now are doing counseling over Zoom. And they thought it would be horrible, but they found that in some cases it actually works quite well, and that they're planning to have a video conferencing part of their practices after things get back to normal, that in certain circumstances that this actually would be very positive. So I think that some of those things that we're having to deal with now because of our social distancing will stay in the future. I hope that I hope everyone is gaining more of an appreciation for science and medicine, and the need for more STEM education and research and outreach. And because every day there are stories about our headlines are all about science and medicine.
What I really hope is that the respect for science, in spite of some attacks on science right now, and in spite of the fact that people are legitimately seeing in real time how science is constantly improving itself and correcting itself, right? You know X, Y, and Z, and you make your plans based on that, and then other information comes in, right? So the way in which science is a never perfect but always self-correcting process, I hope that people will see this and understand that as a strength of science instead of as a weakness of science. Understanding that the constant ability to learn something new and then adapt to that learning is important, and something that helps us all over time.
So my work has been proceeding much in the same way as prior to the social distancing and isolation, except that everything is done over Zoom instead of in person. But I have several computers at home, and I can access computers at the University of Utah and out the world, actually, and colleagues both at the University of Utah and throughout the world. And so I have my weekly meetings with my graduate students and postdocs, and it's all via video conferencing. And then certainly the teaching on by video conferencing. And so the day-to-day sorts of processes are continuing. But certainly we miss that interaction that we have when we're together around the espresso machine and together at lunch, and together at all the kinds of just seeing people and the serendipitous types of exchanges that one has that we're missing all of that. And at the Scientific Computing and Imaging Institute, we have actually worked in the field of epidemiology before, and we've had multiple research grants that have enabled us to use some of our visualization research to help better visualize and analyze the spread of disease.
I'll say just a little bit, which is what a poet does is vanish into a room and emerge some months later with a few pieces of paper blinking in the light. And I don't think that that's going to change very much now. We're always working at the place where the mind meets the world. And what changes is the world. And therefore, what changes is the tenor or the tone of the poems as they come out of that.
All of my conferences between now and September have all moved from in-person conferences to virtual online conferences. So in about 6 months is when at least many people are anticipating that we'll be able to maybe start getting back to normal and start interacting again personally. And so it's 6 months is an interesting timeline. Hopefully within 6 months, we will have great ideas. Our great scientists will have ideas and be fairly far along on developing effective vaccines and treatments. Hopefully our economy will be rebounding within this 6 months time frame. Hopefully the world will start to get back to seeming a little more normal. But I think that there's such pressure and such interest in having all of that happen as soon as possible. I hope that people won't go too fast, so that we get by this and don't have rebounds and spikes throughout the way. But I'm certainly looking forward to the world in 6 months.
Also, as we come out of this time, we will be reassessing our relationship to technology. We'll be reassessing the need for encounters to be face-to-face. And the fear that I have around that is that because it's cheaper to bring people together by Zoom and other technological means in classrooms as well as in conferences, that the move will be to save money. So that, by using technology instead of face-to-face encounters. And what I hope is that there will be a period of really serious assessment about where technologically based meetings really can adequately substitute for the face-to-face, because this could have important environmental consequences as well as financial advantages, et cetera. Those are all good things. But I think about the grief of my student who had been on such intimate terms with her colleagues and friends and was denied that encounter at the end. And I'm reminded that we're mammals, and we actually do need to be in rooms together where we can read each other's micro cues and smell each other and do all of those things that mammals do to enhance their experience. So I'm really very much hoping that we don't lose that. And then finally, I really hope that the assessment that we seem to be undergoing, reconsidering who's an essential employee and what kinds of protections employees that we had thought of very little, had not considered to be essential until this particular moment, that we'll move forward and understand that they need wage support and health support with their health insurance and medical needs, et cetera, that we will value them as they should be valued and as we are needing them, even when they're invisible to us. Speaking of social media, I keep seeing on social media videos of wildlife coming back into our urban spaces. One of the ones that was circulating not long ago was dolphins playing in what had been the two polluted Venetian canals. And we saw a raccoon walking down our front walk the other day. We know we have raccoons, but we don't usually see them in broad daylight hanging out in our front yard, and coyotes in downtown Los Angeles. I think that the animals are feeling comfortable coming back almost immediately into the spaces that they used to inhabit. So that's another thing that I'd like to think about, is how we're living side by side in the environment with our fellow creatures.
Another positive thing that we're seeing throughout the world is, because everyone is sheltering at home, our air is cleaner, the water is cleaner, our world is less polluted, and I hope that we will be able to take away some of those positives after people start back into their normal and daily lives. That we are making a difference in terms of the world's pollution, and so let's step back and hopefully learn that as one of many lessons that we hopefully will learn as going through this traumatic time.